Hello everyone, and welcome back to Haunted Tales. Tonight we're diving into something truly unsettling. 10 of the most disturbing true Halloween horror stories ever recorded. These aren't campfire fables or scripted tales meant to entertain. What you're about to hear are real events, drawn from police reports, verified witness statements, and the chilling testimonies of those who lived through Halloween nights that turned into something far darker than anyone could imagine. From costumed gatherings that ended in terror, to roads that swallowed travelers whole, to haunted houses that refused to remain empty. Each story you'll hear tonight carries a trace of truth that's impossible to ignore. These accounts have been cross-checked through official records and multiple sources to protect the privacy of those involved, while ensuring the disturbing reality behind them remains intact. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Haunted Tales and tap the bell icon, because what you're about to hear is only the beginning. When October's shadows grow long and the air turns cold, some stories don't stay buried. They return to remind us that Halloween isn't always make-believe. In the peaceful heart of California's wine country, Halloween night of 2004 carried the same easy rhythm it always did. Soft laughter from bars, the distant music of parties drifting through the autumn air, and the faint rustle of leaves whispering along the vineyards. It was the kind of night where people felt safe, the kind where the world outside seemed to pause in quiet celebration. But for three women sharing a cozy home on Dorset Street in Napa, that night would descend into something unspeakably dark. Their names were Adrienne Insogna, Leslie Mazzara, and Lauren Mianza, young, full of promise, and like most people in that neighborhood, they believed Napa was immune to real evil. What they didn't know was that someone close to them was about to shatter that illusion forever. That evening began innocently. The women had spent the day decorating the porch with jack-o'-lanterns and laughing about costumes. They had wine, candy, movies, the warmth of ordinary friendship that only deepened with the comfort of trust. As the night wore on, trick-or-treaters faded away, and by midnight, the street outside had gone silent. One by one, lights went out behind closed doors. The world fell into darkness and sleep. Inside, Lauren was the last to head to bed. She checked the locks, turned off the downstairs lights, and climbed the creaking staircase to her room. The only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a dog. Sometime after 1:30 a.m., Lauren awoke to a noise she couldn't place, a soft rustle, followed by the creak of a floorboard. Half asleep, she told herself it was the house settling. But then came another sound, slow, deliberate footsteps. She froze. The air felt wrong, thicker somehow, as if the walls were holding their breath. Somewhere above her, a faint crash broke the silence. It was followed by something much worse, a muffled scream that stopped as quickly as it began. Lauren's heart pounded. She sat up, listening, every nerve alive with dread. The sound came again. A gasp, a thud, then what she swore was the sound of furniture scraping against the floor. She slid from her bed and crept toward the stairs. The house was pitch dark, but through the slats of the banister she saw movement, a shadow passing across the faint glow of the streetlight outside. For one brief moment, she saw the outline of a man, broad shoulders, dark clothes, gloved hands glinting faintly. He moved with confidence, not the panicked rhythm of a thief, but with the quiet, assured motion of someone who belonged there. Lauren pressed herself against the wall, covering her mouth to keep from making a sound. Her pulse hammered in her ears. The man paused at the bottom of the staircase, and in that instant she could hear him breathing. Deep, heavy, controlled. Then, just as suddenly, he turned, opened the front door, and slipped into the night without a word. Lauren waited. Minutes dragged into what felt like eternity before she dared to move. When she finally climbed the stairs, what she found would haunt her forever. The air was sharp with the metallic tang of blood. In Adriana's room, the floor was slick, red spreading across the carpet in uneven patches. Adrienne lay collapsed near the window, her hand outstretched as if reaching for something. Leslie's room was worse. She was tangled in sheets, her blonde hair darkened with blood, the pillow shredded with knife marks. The violence was staggering. Raw, personal, vicious. It looked less like a random break-in and more like a moment of uncontrolled rage. Lauren's scream tore through the house, echoing down the quiet street. Neighbors woke to the sound, some describing it later as the kind of scream that didn't sound human. One called 911. Another stepped out into the yard and swore. They heard crying coming from inside that house long after Lauren had fled. When police arrived, the sun was just beginning to rise over the vineyards, painting the street gold, an unsettling contrast to the horror inside. Officers moved cautiously, documenting every drop of blood, every footprint, every sign of struggle. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. The only clues were a window screen cut from the outside, a trail of cigarette butts near the yard, and the quiet emptiness of two lives brutally ended. In the days that followed, the Napa community was paralyzed. Reporters descended on the town, and neighbors whispered theories behind closed doors. Parents stopped letting their kids trick-or-treat, and people began locking doors they once left open. The police kept working, collecting DNA, interviewing friends and co-workers, but every lead went cold. The murders seemed too calculated for a stranger, too brutal for a burglary. Then, weeks later, a small detail broke the silence. The DNA from the cigarettes didn't belong to any of the women or their families. Someone had been watching that house, waiting for the right night. Nearly a year passed. The story faded from headlines, but in Napa, the tension lingered. People started to move away from the neighborhood, unable to live under the weight of what had happened. And then, in September of 2005, the killer came forward. His name was Eric Koppel, a quiet, unassuming man engaged to one of Adrianne's close friends. He had attended the victims' funerals, cried beside their families, and even stood beside Lauren at candlelight vigils. He had comforted them, knowing all along what he had done. When the DNA evidence began to close in, he confessed before police could even knock on his door. In his confession, he described breaking into the house through the window, climbing the stairs with a knife in his hand, and standing over the sleeping women. He said he didn't know why he did it, that something inside him snapped. The investigators later said the attack was fueled by jealousy and rage, emotions so deep they left no room for reason. Each stab wound was violent, deliberate, as if he were trying to erase them rather than kill them. When it was over, he washed his hands, walked down the stairs, and vanished into the night, leaving behind a silence that still haunts the street to this day. When Eric Koppel was sentenced to life in prison without parole, the courtroom was filled with the sound of muffled sobs. The parents of the victims spoke directly to him, asking why. He had no answer. He only looked down, tears mixing with guilt, whispering again that he didn't understand what made him do it. But even in his absence, something lingered. In the years since the murders, the house on Dorset Street has changed owners several times. Each family stays for a while, then moves away. The new residents speak cautiously when asked about strange things inside. They say the upstairs hallway feels unnaturally cold no matter the season. That the lights sometimes flicker for no reason. That the sound of soft footsteps can be heard long after midnight. Some even claim that on certain nights they hear a woman's voice whispering from the top of the stairs. Faint, almost pleading. It says one word: run. Neighbors tell their own stories too. They talk about the window upstairs, the same one where Adrianne was found. Some claim that on Halloween night, if you drive past slowly at exactly 1:45 a.m., you'll see a faint glow behind the curtains, a shimmer like candlelight. Others say it's just a reflection, a trick of the streetlights. But those who've seen it swear it's something else. They describe the shape of a woman's silhouette standing perfectly still, staring out into the street, waiting. Today, Dorset Street looks ordinary again. Neat lawns, trimmed hedges, families decorating for Halloween. But beneath the calm surface lies a shadow that time hasn't managed to bury. The air feels colder there, the silence heavier. People still lower their voices when they talk about the house. They still remember the night when laughter turned to screams, when innocence vanished, and when the quiet little town of Napa learned that monsters don't always wear masks. Sometimes they wear familiar faces. Sometimes they're the ones standing right beside you, smiling, pretending to mourn the very lives they've taken. And every year when Halloween returns, the story resurfaces like a ghost, reminding everyone that true horror doesn't come from haunted houses or flickering lights. It comes from the darkness that hides in the most ordinary hearts. Halloween in 2001 had come and gone like it always did in State College. Pennsylvania, with crowded sidewalks, fog hanging low over the campus streets, and the sharp bite of autumn air cutting through the laughter of students. It was the kind of night that felt safe, vibrant, ordinary. The trees were bare, the sky was black velvet, and the streetlights hummed over the endless flow of costumes, car horns, and distant music. Among the thousands of students drifting between house parties and late-night diners was 21-year-old Cindy Song, a bright, artistic, and deeply loved Penn State student who had come to America from South Korea to study fine arts. Her friends remembered her as shy but adventurous, quiet but full of light. On that Halloween night, she wore a pink bunny costume, playful, innocent, the kind of outfit that makes for photos and laughter. She had no idea that this would be the last costume she would ever wear, and that by the time dawn arrived, she would vanish into the kind of darkness that leaves no trace, only questions. Cindy had attended a Halloween party with two of her close friends. They spent the evening dancing, laughing, and taking photos like any other group of college students. Around 2 a.m., the night had wound down, and her friends drove her home to her apartment complex, the Park Apartments, just off campus. It was cold, the roads slick with mist, and the parking lot eerily empty. They pulled up outside her building, headlights cutting across the stillness. Cindy thanked them, smiled, and waved goodbye before walking toward her door. She was only steps away from safety, from warmth, from her bed. She carried her purse, her phone, and her keys. Her friends watched her until she was halfway up the path, then drove off, unaware they were the last people who would ever see her. When morning came, the sun rose over a quiet, leaf-strewn campus. Cindy didn't show up to class. Her friends assumed she was sleeping off the night before. But by evening, when her phone still went to voicemail and no one had heard from her, the unease began to grow. The next day, the unease turned into fear. By the third day, police were called. Officers entered her apartment expecting maybe a misunderstanding. Maybe she'd gone to visit someone. Maybe she'd simply needed time alone. But when they stepped inside, the air felt wrong. Her bag was on the floor. Her cell phone was on the desk. Her false eyelashes from the bunny costume were neatly placed on the bathroom counter, as if she'd begun to unwind for bed. Her keys were missing, but her car was still parked outside. There was no sign of forced entry, no sign of a struggle. Everything looked normal, too normal. It was as though she had walked in, taken off her makeup, and simply disappeared into thin air. Detectives combed the neighborhood. They interviewed everyone in the complex: neighbors, delivery drivers, security guards, partygoers from the night before. No one had seen anything unusual. There were no screams, no sounds of struggle, no witnesses. The last confirmed sighting was that moment in the parking lot at 2 a.m. It was as if the shadows had swallowed her whole. Days turned to weeks. Flyers appeared across town with Cindy's smiling face printed over the words "missing" in bold black letters. Police dogs searched the nearby woods and creek beds. Helicopters scanned the area with thermal imaging. Her family flew from South Korea to join the search, her mother clinging to hope that her daughter was alive somewhere, maybe kidnapped, maybe trapped, maybe waiting for rescue. But every lead led nowhere. Every phone tip turned to silence. Forensic teams dusted her apartment. Nothing. No fingerprints, no footprints, no trace of blood. The absence of evidence was the most chilling part. It wasn't chaos. It was precision. Someone had taken her without leaving a single sign that they were ever there. Then came the rumors. Some said Cindy had been seen at a mall hours away, wandering aimlessly. Others said she'd been spotted with a man at a rest stop off Interstate 80, tall, with a scar across his face, driving a gray sedan. Witnesses claimed the woman looked frightened, hesitant, as though she wanted to speak but couldn't. By the time officers arrived, they were gone. The tip went cold. The story spread like wildfire through the campus and across Pennsylvania. People whispered of human trafficking rings, of serial kidnappers, of predators who targeted women walking alone after parties. But there was no proof, only fear. As the months passed, the town began to move on. But Cindy's mother refused to. She moved into her daughter's apartment for a time, unable to leave the place where she had last lived. She spoke to the local news almost daily, begging for answers. She even hired private investigators, but they found nothing. On the anniversary of Cindy's disappearance, students lit candles and placed them at the edge of the apartment complex parking lot. a silent vigil for the girl who had walked from her friend's car into oblivion. Then, in 2003, 2 years after she vanished, a horrifying discovery brought Cindy's case back to life. Police in Wilkes-Barre, about 100 miles away, arrested a man named Hugo Selensky. He was suspected of multiple murders after human remains were found buried in his backyard. Bones, skulls, and personal belongings of at least 5 victims. One of his associates, a man named Michael Kurkowski, confessed that he and Selensky had once abducted a young Asian woman near State College, kept her imprisoned for several days, and then killed her. The description matched Cindy's song. Investigators swarmed the property and the media erupted with speculation. For a brief moment, it seemed the mystery would finally end. But when the remains were tested, none of them matched Cindy's DNA. Her body wasn't there. The hope that had flickered in her mother's eyes died again. Authorities realized they were back at the beginning. No proof, no closure, no trace. But the mention of Selensky changed how people viewed Cindy's disappearance. It wasn't random anymore. It wasn't a college student getting lost or running away. Someone had planned it. Someone had been watching her. And somewhere in Pennsylvania, that someone had never been caught. Over the years, the story became legend, whispered among students every October as they walked home from Halloween parties, glancing over their shoulders when the streets were too quiet. They said Cindy's ghost still lingered near the apartment complex, walking the path from the parking lot to the door that she never reached. Tenants who moved into her old unit claimed to hear light footsteps outside their window at exactly 2 a.m., the same time she vanished. Some said they heard gentle knocking at the door, followed by the sound of keys jingling, as if someone was trying to come home. Others reported finding pink feathers from a costume tail in the hallway, even years later, long after the building had been renovated. There's a certain stillness to that neighborhood now, a kind of respectful quiet. Even the breeze that passes through the complex feels different on late October nights. People cross the parking lot faster than usual, especially when it's cold and the air smells like rain. They say it's superstition, but many believe Cindy never truly left. Her spirit wanders those few dozen steps she never finished, caught in a loop between the laughter of her last night and the silence that followed. As time went on, her mother continued to plead for answers. In interviews, her voice cracked with exhaustion. "I still wait for her," she said, "because no one told me she is gone." The pain of not knowing became its own form of death, slow, relentless, and eternal. What makes Cindy's story so disturbing isn't just the mystery. It's the precision of her disappearance, the lack of chaos, the total erasure. Whoever took her knew the layout, knew her schedule, knew exactly how to approach without leaving a trace. An FBI profiler who reviewed the case years later said the abduction had all the hallmarks of a calculated predator. This wasn't random, he said. It was controlled. It was done by someone comfortable with abduction, someone who had done it before. That statement chilled investigators because it meant that Cindy might not have been the first, and she likely wasn't the last. Today, more than 20 years later, Cindy Song's case remains unsolved. Her file still sits in the archives of the Ferguson Township Police Department, marked open and active. Occasionally, tips still come in. Someone thinks they saw her, or found something that belonged to her, or heard a confession at a bar. But none ever hold up. None bring her home. Every Halloween, on the anniversary of her disappearance, locals gather near the same parking lot where she was last seen. They leave flowers, candles, and notes written in trembling handwriting. The air is cold, the night quiet except for the distant hum of cars on the highway. If you stand there long enough, they say you can feel it, the weight of unfinished footsteps. The town of Adams, Tennessee, rests quietly along the Red River, a place where the air smells of damp soil, where tobacco barns lean against the weight of time, and where the silence at night can make even the bravest souls uneasy. To the outsider, Adams seems like any other sleepy southern town, but to those who've lived there long enough, the ground carries whispers. They'll tell you that the soil itself remembers, that beneath the gentle hum of cicadas and the slow turning of river currents lies something ancient, restless, and watching. And at the center of it all stands a small, unassuming log cabin, the Bell Witch Cabin, one of America's most enduring and terrifying legends. The story begins in the early 1800s with a farmer named John Bell, his wife Lucy, and their children, who had settled in Adams after moving from North Carolina. They were respected, prosperous, and faithful, the kind of family others admired. But in 1817, something began to stir on their land. It started subtly, tapping on the walls, scratching sounds under the floorboards, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. At first, John believed it was an animal or the wind. But then the sounds grew louder, clearer, and impossible to explain. Family members began hearing faint voices, a woman's voice, angry and mocking, calling their names at night. Then came the attacks. Invisible hands would pull blankets from beds. Furniture would shake violently. The children were slapped, scratched, and pinched by unseen forces. The entity, soon calling itself Kate, claimed to be the spirit of a woman who had once lived nearby and held a grudge against John Bell. Over time, Kate's power grew. She could speak in full sentences, sing hymns, and hold conversations with visitors. What terrified people most wasn't just what she did, but what she knew. She could repeat conversations that had occurred miles away, describe events in detail before they happened, and answer questions whispered under breath. People traveled from across the country to witness it. Even General Andrew Jackson, the future president, visited the Bell farm to see the phenomenon himself. His men reported that their carriage wheels locked mysteriously on the road leading to the cabin, and that they heard laughter echoing through the trees. By 1820, the haunting had turned deadly. John Bell fell ill. Seizures, paralysis, choking fits that came and went without cause. Every time he suffered, the spirit mocked him. "Old Jack Bell," it would cackle, "will never get up again." Then, on December 20th, John Bell was found dead in his bed. A small vial of strange liquid sat on his nightstand. When a drop was given to the family cat, the animal died instantly. The voice of Kate was heard laughing and singing. "I gave old Jack a big dose last night. Fixed him good." After John Bell's death, the disturbances slowed but never entirely ceased. The Bell family eventually moved away, but the story remained. 2 centuries later, the legend of the Bell Witch still haunts Adams. The original Bell farm is long gone, but the land remains, and on it stands a small reconstructed log cabin near a dark limestone cave, known simply as the Bell Witch Cave. Locals say the spirit never left, only retreated into the earth. Those who enter the cave speak of hearing whispers that echo back their own words, of shadows that move against the light, of cold hands brushing their shoulders in total darkness. Tour guides tell of cameras malfunctioning, batteries draining, and visitors emerging pale and trembling, claiming they heard a woman's laughter deep inside the stone corridors. Over the years, researchers and paranormal investigators have tried to explain the phenomenon. Some say it's geological, magnetic fields and underground rivers causing hallucinations. Others call it suggestion, mass hysteria, or the power of local folklore. But then there are the testimonies, modern accounts that defy explanation. One such account came from a man named David Langford, a park ranger who patrolled the grounds in the late 1980s. He had grown up hearing the stories but never believed them. "I thought it was tourist bait," he once said. One night, just after closing, he heard what he thought was a child crying near the cave entrance. Thinking someone had gotten lost, he grabbed his flashlight and followed the sound. The crying grew louder as he entered, echoing against the rock walls. Then suddenly it stopped. He stood still, his light flickering. The air grew colder. From behind him came a voice, calm and clear, whispering his full name, David Langford. He turned, the beam catching only the jagged walls. "Who's there?" he called. The voice spoke again, closer this time, almost right behind his ear. "You shouldn't have come here alone." The next thing he remembered was waking up outside the cave entrance with his flashlight lying several feet away, and his wristwatch stopped at exactly midnight. He never went back inside again. Another story came from a group of paranormal researchers in 1998. They had set up infrared cameras inside the cave, hoping to document any activity overnight. Around 3 a.m., one of their cameras captured a faint white mist forming near the back chamber. It shifted, took on a humanoid shape, and then darted toward the lens, before the feed cut out. When the team checked their equipment the next morning, that particular camera had melted wiring, as if exposed to intense heat. No other cameras were damaged. Locals tell of similar experiences. Farmers report hearing knocks on their windows at night, followed by a woman's laugh carried by the wind. Visitors find handprints in the dust on their car windshields, small and delicate, even though the area is fenced off. One family who lived near the site in the early 2000s claimed that their daughter would wake up screaming, saying a lady with long hair was whispering to her from the corner of her room. Despite the fear, the town of Adams has learned to live with its legend. Every year, hundreds visit the Bell Witch Cave around Halloween. They come with flashlights, cameras, and a mix of curiosity and dread. The guides tell them the same warning before every tour: if you hear her voice, don't answer. If you see her shadow, don't follow it. And if you feel her hand, don't turn around. Most visitors laugh nervously, thinking it's just part of the show. But every year, at least one person leaves before the tour ends, shaken, claiming to have heard something whisper their name. In recent years, historians revisiting the Bell Witch case have uncovered strange inconsistencies. The land where the Bell Farm once stood was originally sacred ground to the indigenous tribes that lived along the Red River. Some believe the haunting may have begun not with Kate Batts or a family feud, but with something older, a disturbance of land that was never meant to be touched. There are stories of ancient burial sites nearby, of artifacts uncovered during the farm's construction, and of a curse spoken long before the Bells ever arrived. Whether it's true or not, one fact remains: the disturbances always seem to happen on the same ground, as though the earth itself remembers. The modern Bell Witch Cabin is a reconstruction built using timber from the original farm. People say it holds the same energy. Visitors who stay after dark report hearing footsteps on the porch, even when the door is locked. Sometimes the rocking chair by the fireplace begins to sway slowly on its own. And occasionally, when the night is still and the moonlight slips through the window, the chair stops, and the faint sound of a woman's sigh fills the room. One former caretaker described an experience he could never explain. While closing up one evening, he heard a faint humming from inside the cabin, a woman's voice singing an old hymn. He assumed it was a recording left on by a tour group and stepped inside to turn it off. But the singing stopped the moment he crossed the threshold. The room was empty. He stood in the doorway, listening. Then, from upstairs, came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, crossing from one side of the floor to the other. He called out, but there was no answer. When he climbed the stairs, the singing resumed behind him, back on the first floor. He ran out, locked the door, and quit the next day. Today, the Bell Witch remains one of America's oldest unsolved hauntings, a story that has survived wars, generations, and skepticism. Some say she's a fragment of grief, an echo of violence that time can't erase. Others insist she's still there, vengeful and aware, bound to the land and those who disturb it. What's certain is that the legend has never faded. Journalists, scientists, and skeptics have all come to Adams, and yet none have left without admitting that the place feels different, as if it breathes. If you ever find yourself driving through rural Tennessee at dusk, the road winding through tobacco fields and forgotten farmhouses, you might see a sign for the Bell Witch Cave. The air will feel heavy, the trees close in, and for a moment, you might think about turning back. But if curiosity wins and you stand before that cabin as the sun slips below the horizon, remember the warning etched into local memory. The Bell Witch does not forgive, and she does not forget. The wind that sweeps across the field might sound like an ordinary breeze, but if you listen closely, beneath the rustle of leaves and the creak of the old wooden porch, you might hear a woman's voice whispering from the darkness, "I'm still here." Deep in the woods of northern New Jersey lies a stretch of asphalt that locals refuse to drive after dark. A narrow winding strip of road cutting through miles of forest, Clinton Road has no houses, no gas stations, and almost no cell service. It is the kind of place where headlights feel swallowed by the trees and every sound carries too far. Even on summer nights, the air turns unnaturally cold there, the kind of cold that seeps through your jacket, crawls along your skin, and whispers to you that you're not alone. To the people who live nearby, Clinton Road isn't just a back road. It's a scar carved through the wilderness, a place cursed by history and haunted by what's been left behind. The stories about Clinton Road have been told for decades. Some say the ghosts of children drowned in a nearby creek appear on the bridge at midnight. Others speak of phantom trucks that chase lone drivers until they vanish into thin air. There are tales of witches, satanic cults, and even ghostly animals with glowing eyes. But the most enduring story, the one that keeps parents from letting their kids roam too far, is the legend of the vanishing children of Clinton Road. It begins with the bridge over Dead Man's Curve, a sharp, dangerous bend where the guardrail ends abruptly, leading straight into the black water below. Locals call it Ghost Boy Bridge. According to legend, sometime in the 1970s, a young boy was standing near the edge, tossing coins into the creek for luck, when a speeding car came around the corner and struck him. He was thrown into the water and never resurfaced. For years afterward, drivers who stopped on that bridge reported seeing the boy's reflection in the water, small, pale, and motionless, staring up at them from beneath the surface. Soon, the story evolved. Teenagers began to dare each other to test it, to stop at midnight, throw a coin into the water, and wait. Some said that if your intentions were pure, nothing would happen. But if you came out of arrogance or cruelty, the boy would throw the coin back. Dozens of people claimed to have seen the impossible, a small silver coin bouncing back from the darkness, landing at their feet moments after they dropped it in. Over time, the legend grew darker. Drivers began reporting that they had seen not one boy but several, children standing together near the tree line, silent and still, their faces pale in the moonlight. They never moved, never spoke, but their eyes followed passing cars. One trucker who'd taken a wrong turn near midnight said he saw what looked like a group of kids walking in single file down the side of the road. Thinking they might be lost, he slowed down. But when his headlights swept over them, they vanished, all of them, leaving only the echo of footsteps on the pavement. He drove the rest of the way shaking, his radio flickering with static, the air inside his cab colder than the wind outside. The police have long dismissed these stories as folklore, but there are documented reports, real calls logged into the West Milford Police Department, of drivers who've encountered figures on that road. In one report from 1993, an off-duty officer described seeing a young girl standing near the center line around 2 a.m. When he stopped to ask if she was all right, she turned and smiled. Her eyes reflected the light like an animal's. Then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. He filed an official statement, but his colleagues later told him he must have been overtired. He left the force within a year, citing personal stress. The road's history doesn't make it easier to explain. Long before it became a paved route, the area around Clinton Road was known to early settlers as a dangerous place, steeped in superstition. Native tribes once called the surrounding forest the land that breathes cold, because of the constant chill that hung in the air even during summer. During the 19th century, a mining community called Clinton Furnace operated nearby. Workers complained of strange lights in the woods, of tools disappearing, of whispers in languages they didn't understand. The furnace itself still stands, a blackened stone structure hidden in the trees, where teenagers dare each other to go at night. They say if you look inside the archway long enough, you'll see a shadow step forward from the darkness. In the 1980s, police discovered a series of abandoned buildings deep in the woods off Clinton Road. Inside were remnants of what appeared to be occult gatherings, burned candles, symbols carved into stone, and animal remains arranged in ritualistic circles. Officers cordoned off the area, but rumors spread that a cult still operated there, practicing rituals to summon the spirits said to haunt the forest. Some locals even claimed the ghosts of the drowned children are not victims of accidents but offerings, sacrifices to keep. Something far worse contained in the woods modern paranormal investigators who've explored Clinton Road often come away changed. In 2005, a small team from a New York-based research group visited to record EMF readings near the bridge. They reported that their equipment malfunctioned repeatedly. Cameras drained of power within minutes. Recorders captured faint voices, not words, but soft crying. When they returned to their car, they found small, wet handprints on the windows, as if a child had been standing outside touching the glass. There were no footprints on the muddy ground. Another account came from a woman named Melissa Carpenter, who shared her story on a local radio show in 2011. She and her fiancé were driving home late at night after visiting friends. As they approached Clinton Road, Fog began to roll in, thick and low. The headlights cut through it like misted glass. "We were about halfway across the bridge," she said, "when I saw them. 2 kids standing by the rail, holding hands. I thought maybe they'd broken down or something. But when we got closer, I realized they weren't moving. They were just staring at us." Her fiancé slowed down. The children looked no older than 8. A boy and a girl. Both barefoot, both pale as candle wax. "They didn't blink," she said. "They didn't even breathe." Then, as the car passed, both turned their heads in perfect unison and vanished. The road ahead was empty. When she looked back, the bridge was clear, but 2 small handprints had appeared on the outside of her window, pressed into the condensation. She swears to this day that they were too small to belong to any living child. Locals will tell you that Clinton Road has always been hungry, that it takes what it wants. There are more accidents there than on any other stretch of highway in the county. Dozens of fatal crashes over the decades, many at dead man's curve. People who've survived say it feels like something pulls your car toward the edge, like invisible hands tugging at the steering wheel. Others report headlights appearing behind them, a pair of bright white lights that follow at an exact distance no matter how fast they drive. Some say it's a phantom truck, a ghostly vehicle that chases intruders off the road before disappearing into the trees. Police have never been able to explain the number of strange incidents, though unofficially some officers admit the area gives them chills. One retired state trooper told a journalist, "I've seen a lot of bad things on New Jersey roads, wrecks, fires, bodies. But there's something about that road that isn't right. The air feels charged, like the second you step out of your car, you're being watched." The strangest thing is that almost every sighting, every ghost story, every unexplained event happens near the same stretch of water beneath Ghost Boy Bridge. Some investigators believe the legend has created a psychic imprint, that the grief of the townspeople has manifested into something real. But others think the truth runs deeper, that the boy who died there was never alone. There were other children too. In the 1930s, a nearby orphanage burned down under suspicious circumstances. Several children were never found. Locals say their bodies were never recovered because they had fled into the forest that night and never came out. Some believe those are the figures seen along the roadside, eternally trying to find their way home. Even now, people report strange things near the bridge. Coins appear on the asphalt, stacked neatly in small piles. Tiny handprints form on the fogged glass of parked cars. Some have captured faint laughter on recording devices left overnight. And every so often, police receive a call from a driver claiming they saw children standing on the road, always around midnight, always near the same bend. By the time officers arrive, the road is empty. Those who've dared to return say there's one unmistakable moment when the forest seems to hold its breath. The crickets stop, the wind dies, the silence becomes heavy, as though the world itself has paused. That's when people say they feel it. The soft brush of small fingers against their hand, or the light pat of a child's touch on their shoulder. If they drop a coin, they swear they hear it splash into the creek below, and then, a second later, hear it land on the bridge beside their feet. Clinton Road. Excellent. Here's the extended cinematic narration of Story 5, The Ghosts of Highway 666, The Devil's Highway. This version follows the tone and structure of your previous stories. Dark, immersive, realistic, and documentary style, blending folklore, historical events, and first-person testimonies in one continuous chilling paragraph. Around 1,700 to 1,800 words, no section breaks or pauses. Designed for a haunted tales narration that grips from the first word to the last. Story 5, The Ghosts of Highway 666, The Devil's Highway. There is a road that stretches across the desolate deserts of the American Southwest, a long, cracked ribbon of asphalt that cuts through the emptiness between Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. Once known as U.S. Route 666, it carried a name that no one wanted to speak after dark, the Devil's Highway. The number itself, 666, became an omen, whispered in gas stations and truck stops, scrawled on road signs by vandals, and feared by those who had no choice but to drive it at night. On maps, it's been renamed U.S. Route 491, but the locals still call it by its true name. They say no matter how many times you change the sign, You can't erase a curse that's been sealed in blood and asphalt. The legend of Highway 66 is older than the road itself. Long before the first cars sped across it, native tribes told stories about the land, of spirits that roamed the mesas and shadows that hunted travelers who disrespected the desert. When the government laid down the highway in the 1920s, it followed ancient trails that the Navajo and Ute once warned people to avoid after sundown. The road became infamous almost immediately. Car accidents were more frequent there than anywhere else in the region. Engines failed without reason, radios filled with static, and drivers vanished without a trace. It wasn't long before the stories began. Tales of black sedans that chased cars at impossible speeds, of phantom hitchhikers, and of beasts that weren't quite human lurking just beyond the headlights. Truckers who've spent their lives on the road will tell you that the Devil's Highway isn't just dangerous, it's alive. They talk about a strange energy that hums beneath the tires like the earth itself is vibrating. One driver, Frank Rodriguez, shared his story on a late-night radio show in 1999. He was hauling a shipment from Gallup to Monticello when the desert wind began to howl. It was close to midnight, he said, and the sky looked like it was swallowing itself. No moon, no stars, just black. Then I saw them, headlights in my mirror coming up fast. I moved to the right lane, thinking it was some kid in a sports car, but the lights didn't pass. They stayed right behind me, maybe 20 feet back, blinding me through the glass. He tried to accelerate, but his truck began to shake. Then the lights rose off the ground, he said. Not up a hill, up into the air. And I realized they weren't headlights, they were orbs. Two perfect white circles floating behind me. He looked away for half a second, and when he looked back, they were gone. Frank reached Monticello shaken and pale. His truck's radio had stopped working, and every clock inside his cab was frozen at 12:13 a.m., the exact moment he'd seen the lights. Mechanics later found nothing wrong with his vehicle. He swore off night runs on that stretch forever, and he wasn't the only one. Reports like his have stacked up over the decades, painting a picture of a road that doesn't just scare people, it marks them. One of the earliest documented encounters dates back to 1952. A family traveling from Albuquerque to Cortez stopped on the side of the road when their car overheated. The father, John Kirkland, opened the hood while his wife and two children waited inside. Moments later, his wife screamed. Out of the desert came a figure, a tall, thin man dressed entirely in black, walking barefoot along the asphalt. He didn't speak, didn't look at them, just passed by silently, his face hidden by a wide hat. John called out, asking if he needed help, but the figure kept walking until he disappeared behind the rise. Minutes later, another driver pulled over to help. When John mentioned the man, the driver frowned. "You mean the guy with the black hat?" he asked. "He passed me miles back, walking the other way. No one saw him again." Local authorities have always brushed off these claims as heat-induced hallucinations, mirages in the desert sun. But what about the ones that happen after midnight, when the air is cool and still? There are too many stories to ignore. Police archives in Farmington and Shiprock hold dozens of accident reports from the 1960s to the 1990s, involving single-vehicle crashes where the drivers swore they were run off the road by something they couldn't describe. A black car with no driver, a truck made of shadows, a figure standing in the center of the lane. One survivor said he'd seen a woman standing on the roadside waving for help. He pulled over, rolled down the window, and asked if she was all right. She smiled, he said, and her eyes were pure white, no pupils, just light. His car spun out moments later. When rescue crews arrived, the woman was gone, but her footprints, small, bare, and deep, led straight into the desert and stopped abruptly in the middle of nowhere. The Navajo who live near Shiprock have their own explanation. They believe Highway 666 crosses land haunted by skinwalkers, witches capable of taking the form of animals or even other people. They say the skinwalkers run alongside cars, keeping pace for miles before vanishing into the darkness. One woman, Darlene Yazzie, recounted an encounter that has haunted her for decades. She and her cousin were driving home from a powwow when something ran across the road in front of them. It was fast, faster than any animal she'd ever seen. But it wasn't a coyote or a deer. It was on all fours, she said, but it had a human face. I saw it in the headlights. It looked right at me and smiled. They drove the rest of the way in silence. When they got home, they found handprints on the back of their truck, long human fingers streaked with dirt. Over time, Highway 66 gained a reputation as cursed. Mechanics refused to work at night near the rest stops. Gas stations along the route installed extra floodlights. Even the Postal Service began rerouting deliveries to avoid long stretches of it after sunset. There were whispers of accidents that left no bodies behind. Cars found empty, doors open, engines still running. In 1978, a state trooper named David Lewis responded to such a call. A sedan was found idling on the shoulder near the Arizona border, headlights on, driver's door open. Inside, the car was empty except for a woman's purse and a child's teddy bear in the back seat. Tire marks suggested the car had swerved suddenly, stopped, and then nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle. David followed the trail of dust for half a mile before stopping at a cliff's edge overlooking the desert. That's where he saw them, faint lights moving far below, like lanterns bobbing in the dark. He radioed for backup. When they arrived, the lights were gone. The woman and her child were never found. For years after, drivers continued to report the same things. Lights appearing where no roads existed. Voices on CB radios whispering names that matched missing persons reports. Shadows standing at the edge of the desert. And every story seemed to happen between mile markers 233 and 242, the same stretch where the most fatal crashes occurred. Locals called it the corridor. Truckers gave it another name, the Devil's Spine. They said that when you crossed it, you could feel the road dip slightly, like you were descending into something, not a valley, but a place deeper, older, and darker than the rest of the world. By the 1990s, the name alone, Highway 6666, became so infamous that some blamed it for the accidents. Superstition had taken root. Drivers refused to travel it. Tourism declined. In 2003, the federal government finally changed its designation to U.S. Route 491, hoping to erase the fear once and for all. They held a ceremony, blessed the road, and even invited Navajo elders to perform cleansing rituals. But the change did little to stop the hauntings. As one local sheriff put it, you can take the devil off the sign, but you can't take him off the road. In the years since, new reports continue to surface. Modern dashcam footage shows strange distortions. Lights flickering in the middle of the lane, human figures that vanish when approached. In 2014, a family from Colorado shared a story that went viral online. They were driving through New Mexico when their son in the back seat began crying. There's an unspoken rule among the long-haul drivers who run Route 40 through Maryland. If you see a woman in white standing on the roadside near Ilchester Tunnel, you don't stop. No matter how late it is, no matter how lost she looks, you keep driving. Because those who've pulled over to help her, those who've looked too closely, never come away unchanged. The road itself is beautiful by day. It winds through old colonial towns, church steeples rising against green hills, and the soft whisper of the Patapsco River running alongside it. But by night, Route 40 turns into something else entirely. The forest seems to press in closer. The fog thickens without warning, clinging to your windshield like breath. The road narrows and bends, disappearing into stretches of black where your headlights can barely cut through. That's when people say the bride appears. The legend began decades ago, though no one agrees exactly when. Some trace it to the 1930s, others to the 1950s. But everyone agrees on one thing: she was a real woman once. Her name, according to the oldest stories, was Eleanor Marie Jones. In 1935, she was supposed to be married at a small chapel not far from Ellicott City. But on the way to her wedding, tragedy struck. Her car lost control on the slick curve near the tunnel entrance, skidded across the asphalt, and plunged into the ravine below. When rescuers arrived, they found her body pinned inside the wreckage, still wearing her gown, her veil tangled around her face like a shroud. They say her fiancé never recovered. He visited the crash site every night for months, leaving white lilies by the guardrail. When winter came, he disappeared. Some say he took his own life. Others whisper that she came back for him. That was when the first sightings began. A woman in a torn wedding dress, standing near the same bend in the road, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. By the late 1940s, police began receiving reports from travelers who'd seen a woman wandering along Route 40 after midnight. The details were always the same: long dark hair, pale skin, a white gown that looked damp as though she'd just stepped out of water. Most said she was barefoot. Drivers who stopped claimed she spoke softly, almost politely, asking for a ride. When they agreed, she climbed into the back seat without a sound. She'd tell them she was trying to get home to Ellicott City. But somewhere near the bridge, she'd vanish. One of the earliest documented cases appeared in the Baltimore Sun in 1957. A man named Joseph Whitman, a truck driver from Ohio, swore he picked up a woman near the Ilchester Tunnel. She was shivering, he told police. Her dress was dirty like she'd fallen in the mud. I offered her my jacket, but she just smiled. He drove her several miles before she asked him to stop at a small roadside cemetery. When he turned to say something, she was gone. His jacket lay folded neatly on the seat. People dismissed it as exhaustion or drink, but others began seeing her too. A state trooper reported nearly hitting a woman who ran across the road in front of his cruiser one foggy night. When he stopped, there were no footprints. Another man swore he saw her standing directly on the yellow line, veil drifting as if moved by wind, even though the air was perfectly still. Locals soon started calling her the Route 40 Bride. She became both a warning and a ritual. Teenagers would drive the road on Halloween, parking near the tunnel, hoping to catch a glimpse. Some brought flowers, others cameras. A few even claimed to have photos, faint, grainy images showing the outline of a woman's figure in the mist. But beneath the folklore are events that can't be brushed aside. In 1973, a couple named Gary and Lynn Matthews were driving home from a wedding reception just after midnight. They were arguing. She'd wanted to stay longer. He was tired. As they came around the curve near the tunnel, their car's headlights illuminated something standing in the road. It looked like a mannequin, Gary later told a reporter. White dress just standing there. He slammed on the brakes, tires screeching, but the car passed right through her, as if through smoke. The impact shattered the windshield from the inside out. They found no debris, no body, nothing but shards of glass and the faint smell of lilies in the air. The smell became a recurring detail in later reports. Witnesses who encountered the bride often described a sudden, overpowering scent of flowers, sweet and suffocating, followed by cold air that seemed to suck the warmth from their lungs. Then silence. No crickets, no wind. Just the faint rustle of fabric and the sound of breathing that wasn't their own. In the 1990s, Route 40 saw a series of fatal accidents near the same curve where Eleanor had died. Locals began to call it the Bride's Bend. Drivers swore that headlights appeared suddenly in the fog, blinding them. One survivor claimed that a figure had stepped into the road just before he lost control. When investigators examined the scene, they found skid marks leading straight toward the ravine, the same ravine that had claimed the bride decades earlier. Even skeptics have struggled to explain some of the evidence collected there. Paranormal researchers recorded temperature drops of over 20 degrees within seconds near the tunnel. EVPs picked up faint whispers, fragments of words like wait, home, and he promised. One photograph taken in 2007 by a student shows what appears to be a translucent figure, veil flowing behind her, positioned exactly where the fatal crash occurred. Experts dismissed it as lens flare, but those who've been there know the feeling of that place. The oppressive quiet, the strange pull to stop, the way the fog seems to shape itself into something almost human. One of the most disturbing modern accounts came from Angela Perez, a paramedic from Howard County. She and her partner were responding to a minor accident one rainy night in 2014. We were coming down Route 40 when I saw her, she said, standing right on the shoulder. A bride, clear as day. I thought maybe it was part of the crash scene, someone from a party or something. But when they stopped and got out, there was no one there. Moments later, the driver from the crash, dazed but alive, asked her if she'd seen the woman too. He said she was standing in the middle of the road, waving him down. He swerved to miss her and hit the guardrail. His eyes were wide, his voice shaking. She looked right at me, he kept repeating. Right at me. That crash site, according to official records, was the exact location of Eleanor's original accident in 1935. Over the years, new versions of the story have emerged. Some say the bride is not Eleanor at all, but a woman named Mary Riley, a young newlywed who was murdered on her wedding night in 1952. She and her husband had been driving along Route 40 when they picked up a hitchhiker. Later, her husband was found unconscious by the roadside, the bride missing, the car doors flung open. Her body was discovered a week later, her dress torn and covered in mud, just a few hundred feet from the Ilchester Tunnel. The case was never solved. Locals believe the two stories have merged. Two brides, two tragedies, forever bound to the same cursed stretch of road. Whatever the truth, the sightings have never stopped. Truckers still report seeing her standing on the shoulder, veil trailing in the wind. Some claim she runs toward their vehicles before vanishing in a flash of light. Others describe her standing directly in the middle of the tunnel, her eyes reflecting red in their high beams like an animal's. A few drivers even claim she's appeared inside their vehicles, in the back seat, glimpsed only in the rearview mirror, her face twisted in grief. Those who study these hauntings say the bride of Route 40 embodies unfinished love, a soul caught in the moment of loss, replaying it endlessly. Her restless spirit seems tied to the very asphalt, the very curve that destroyed her life. But locals have a simpler explanation. She's waiting, they say. She's waiting for the man who left her standing at the altar. And perhaps that's why she's seen most often. The forests surrounding Louisville, Kentucky hold many secrets, but none as haunting as the legends that cling to the old Waverly Hills Sanatorium and the abandoned railway that runs beneath it. Locals call it the Death Line, a rusted stretch of track long swallowed by weeds and shadow, where the living once crossed paths with the dead. The story goes that if you stand near those tracks on a foggy night, you can still hear the whistle of a train that hasn't run in nearly a century. A ghostly locomotive that roars out of the darkness, carrying the souls of those who never left the sanatorium's halls. The origins of the legend trace back to the early 1900s when tuberculosis swept through Kentucky like a biblical plague. The Waverly Hills Sanatorium was built on a hilltop outside Louisville to house the sick, its isolated location chosen to keep contagion from the city below. Between 1910 and 1943, more than 60,000 people died there, victims of a disease that turned lungs into graveyards. The hospital had a reputation for mercy on the surface, but behind its white walls, patients endured horrifying treatments, collapsed lungs, experimental surgeries, and endless isolation. When they died, their bodies were not carried through the front door, but instead removed through an underground tunnel that sloped from the hospital to the train tracks below. It was known among the staff as the body chute. At the base of that tunnel, a train would arrive every morning to collect the dead. Car after car filled with the nameless, destined for mass graves or crematoriums across the state. The railway itself was decommissioned after the hospital's closure, but the stories of that ghost train began almost immediately. As early as the 1950s, locals reported hearing a train whistle echoing through the woods even though the tracks had long since rusted over. Campers who ventured too close said they felt the ground tremble beneath their feet as if something massive was approaching, only for the vibration to vanish in an instant. Some even claimed to see lights moving through the trees, twin beams like a locomotive's headlights gliding silently through the mist, accompanied by the faint metallic clatter of wheels and the echo of voices crying out in pain. One of the earliest documented encounters came from Frank Delaney, a retired postal worker who lived near Dixie Highway. In a 1961 interview, he told the Courier-Journal that he'd gone walking near the old tracks one night after hearing what sounded like a train horn. It wasn't like any whistle I'd heard before, he said. It was long and hollow, like it came from deep underground. As he followed the sound, the air grew colder, so cold he could see his breath despite it being midsummer. Then he saw it, a dim white light moving slowly along the tracks, growing brighter as it neared. I thought maybe it was some kids with lanterns, he said. But when it passed me, I saw the outline of a train. Cars lit from within, faces looking out the windows. Only they weren't alive. They were gray, hollow, and staring straight ahead. I ran and never went back. As the years passed, more people reported similar sightings. Paranormal investigators set up cameras near the tunnel entrance, capturing strange mists and unexplained orbs. One group from Lexington claimed their EMF meters spiked violently every night at precisely 3:15 a.m., the same time the death trains used to depart during the sanatorium's operating years. They recorded what sounded like a low, mournful horn and the rhythmic clang of steel on steel echoing through the forest, even though the tracks were buried under decades of earth and debris. What unsettled even the skeptics was how often witnesses reported not just hearing the train, but feeling it. One man described his flashlight flickering as the ground began to hum, a vibration that climbed through his boots into his bones. Another said the trees seemed to sway in rhythm, as though something massive was passing by, unseen. In 1979, 2 high school students trespassed near the old line, daring each other to walk the tunnel at midnight. They never made it through. When they came out, both were pale, shaking, and refused to speak about what they'd seen. One of them, years later, told a journalist in confidence that a train had come roaring out of the darkness toward them, glowing white, completely silent. "The driver looked straight at us," he said. "He had no eyes." For decades, locals treated these tales as superstition, but strange incidents continued. In the 1990s, police responding to trespassing reports near the sanatorium often mentioned hearing unexplained noises, screeching metal, the hiss of steam, or faint voices carried on the wind. One officer recalled following what he thought was the sound of a train to an open clearing, only to find the air filled with fog, and in that fog, a line of dim figures standing shoulder to shoulder on the tracks. "They looked like patients," he said, wrapped in hospital gowns. Some were missing limbs. Others were holding on to each other. When my flashlight hit them, they disappeared. The most chilling account, however, comes from Margaret Lee, a nurse who once worked at a retirement home built not far from the old Waverly property. In 2008, she told a local paranormal radio show that she'd been driving home one foggy November night when she saw what looked like an old-fashioned steam engine crossing the road ahead. "It was solid black and covered in frost," she said. But the strangest thing was that there were no tracks there anymore. It just moved across the road, slow as a funeral procession. She stopped her car and watched as it faded into the trees, leaving behind a trail of white mist that smelled faintly of iron and medicine. When she got home, she realized her car's clock had stopped at exactly 3:15 a.m. Some historians believe there's a scientific explanation. They say the sound of trains from nearby lines could echo through the hills, distorted by temperature inversions. The flickering lights might be reflections from passing cars or even swamp gas. But locals know better. They've heard the train even on windless nights when no other line was running. And they've smelled the antiseptic sting of the sanatorium in the air, the same scent that haunted the nurses who worked the night shift there. Those who dare to visit the site today describe an overwhelming sense of sadness that hangs over the forest. The old tracks lie half buried beneath vines, the steel warped and rusted. The tunnel entrance, now sealed by concrete, still breathes cold air from within, like the exhale of something vast and unseen. Paranormal investigators often leave voice recorders near the base of the slope. On playback, they capture faint rhythmic sounds, thuds like wheels turning, the hiss of steam, and once, a clear voice whispering, "All aboard." One group from Tennessee claimed they followed the phantom sound of the whistle deeper into the forest until they saw lights in the distance. "It looked like a train sitting still," one of them said later. Carriages lined up, softly glowing from inside. We could see silhouettes moving behind the windows. When we got closer, everything went black. Just gone. No lights, no sound. Nothing but our own breathing. When they checked their watches afterward, more than an hour had passed, though they swore it felt like minutes. In 2019, drone footage of the area went viral after the camera captured something strange. A faint column of white mist moving along the old track bed, perfectly following the curve of the line before vanishing near the tunnel. Analysts dismissed it as condensation, but locals recognized it immediately. "That's the death train," one man commented. There are places in America where the silence feels wrong. Not peaceful, not empty, but heavy, like something waiting just beyond the range of human sight. Nevada's Route 375, better known to locals and UFO enthusiasts as the Extraterrestrial Highway, is one of those places. The highway cuts through nearly 100 miles of desert wasteland between the small towns of Tonopah and Alamo. It's flanked by endless stretches of brush, broken fences, and mountains that glow faintly under the cold light of the moon. On most nights, the only sounds are the hum of the tires and the whispering wind that carries fine dust across the asphalt. It's a place where time stands still, where even light seems hesitant to linger. For years, Route 375 has been associated with strange lights, UFO sightings, and the nearby secrecy of Area 51. But locals know another story, one that has nothing to do with aliens. They call it the Children of the Highway. Ask anyone who's lived near Rachel or Tikaboo Valley long enough, and they'll tell you that the real reason travelers avoid driving Route 375 after dark has nothing to do with government secrets. It's because of the children who appear in the desert, barefoot, silent, and watching. It began with a report in 2009 from a woman named Carla Jennings, a 42-year-old delivery driver from Napa. She was known among co-workers as level-headed, practical, and not easily frightened. On the night of October 28th, she set out to deliver mechanical supplies to a site near Alamo. She left around sunset, expecting to make the drop and return before dawn. But the desert had other plans. By the time she reached the midpoint of Route 375, it was nearly midnight. The stars above were brighter than she'd ever seen. So bright, in fact, that they reflected faintly off her windshield like scattered glass. She turned down her radio to enjoy the silence, but that silence soon became too complete. No crickets, no wind, no sound of the truck's engine beyond a low hum. That's when she noticed movement ahead. Small, human-shaped figures walking along the right side of the highway. At first, she thought they were hikers or perhaps a stranded family. She slowed her truck, leaning over the wheel to see more clearly. There were 5 of them, all children, walking in a single file line. Their heads were down, their hands by their sides. They wore old-fashioned clothing, dresses, suspenders, caps, the kind of attire you'd expect to see in black and white photos from the 1950s. And then, as her headlights swept over them, Carla's stomach twisted. Their eyes reflected the light like a cat's, glowing silver white in the dark. She stopped the truck about 10 feet away, rolled down her window and called out, "Hey, are you kids okay? Do you need help?" No one answered. The children simply stopped walking. Slowly, they turned their heads toward her, all at once, in perfect unison. Their movements were smooth, too smooth. For a moment, Carla thought she was dreaming because none of them blinked. The smallest one, a girl with long black hair and a pale face, lifted her arm and pointed behind the truck. Carla hesitated, then checked her rearview mirror. At first, all she saw was the red glow of her taillights and swirling dust. But as her eyes adjusted, she realized there were more figures, dozens of them, standing in the desert just off the road. Some were adults, some were children. All of them were watching her. They stood in the brush, motionless, faces expressionless, eyes shining faintly like mirrors catching the moonlight. Carla's heart began to race. Her skin prickled with cold sweat, and a low ringing filled her ears. Without thinking, she slammed her foot on the gas. Her truck roared forward, gravel and sand spitting behind her. In the mirror, she saw the figures fading back into the darkness. Not running, not chasing, but watching. She drove for nearly 30 minutes before she dared to stop. When she finally reached a small gas station outside Alamo, she parked under the bright fluorescent lights and sat trembling behind the wheel. The clerk said she was pale, shaking, her eyes wide like she'd seen death itself. Later that week, Carla told her supervisor what had happened. He laughed it off at first, assuming she was overtired. But when the next driver assigned to that same route reported hearing laughter over his CB radio, faint children's laughter that turned into static, he refused to make the trip again. Within a month, the company quietly rerouted all deliveries during daytime hours only. As word spread, more accounts emerged. A retired trucker named Pete Ramos claimed that one Halloween night in 2011, he saw a small girl kneeling in the middle of Route 375 crying. When he stopped to help, she looked up at him, her eyes glowing silver. Then she vanished. His truck wouldn't start for over 2 hours. During that time, he swore he could hear whispering outside, dozens of voices speaking softly as if right next to his cab. He didn't see anyone, but when dawn came and he finally got the truck running, he found small, dusty footprints on his door, barefoot prints pressed into the grime. He took photos, but when he developed them, the prints were gone. Locals in Rachel claim the story goes much further back. In 1968, they say a bus full of orphaned children was traveling to a Halloween festival in Las Vegas when it disappeared somewhere along the route. Officially, there's no record of such an incident. No police report, no missing vehicle, but several old-timers remember the search parties. They say the desert swallowed that bus whole. Some believe it went off the road into one of the many abandoned mine shafts scattered across the desert. Others think it never existed to begin with. But every Halloween, travelers report strange sightings along Route 375, flickering lights that look like old headlights moving through the sagebrush, laughter that echoes faintly through radio static, or the sound of small feet running across asphalt when no one is there. A few even claim they've seen the ghost of the missing bus itself, its headlights dim, its windows fogged, and faint silhouettes of children pressed against the glass as it moves silently across the desert horizon before vanishing. One former sheriff, Jack Mallory, gave a rare interview in 1999 where he admitted he'd once investigated something near Route 375 that wasn't meant to be found. He described a pattern of barefoot prints circling an abandoned rest area, small prints that appeared overnight and led off into the desert before fading completely. When asked if he believed in the stories, Mallory said only, "The desert remembers what it takes." He refused to comment further. Years later, Carla Jennings retired early and moved out of state. In her final interview before disappearing from public life, she admitted that sometimes, on quiet nights, she still dreams of those children. In her dreams, they stand at the end of her driveway, holding hands, staring through her window. And each time she wakes, her radio turns on by itself, broadcasting nothing but static and faint whispers of a melody, a lullaby she can't quite place. Today, the Nevada Tourism Board sells extraterrestrial highway t-shirts and alien souvenirs, but the locals never drive that road on Halloween. Even the police avoid it if they can. The few who dare to cross it after midnight tell the same story. The air grows cold, the stars dim, and the road seems to stretch longer than it should. And sometimes, just for a second, you'll see small shapes standing in the distance, watching your headlights approach. They say the children of Route 375 aren't looking for revenge or rescue. They're just waiting for someone to stop, to roll down their window, and to look them in the eyes. Because once you do, they'll follow you home. Locals near Rachel, Nevada, the closest town, say the stories go back decades. They talk about a bus full. Deep in the forests of northern New Jersey lies a stretch of asphalt that many locals refuse to drive after dark. Clinton Road, a narrow, twisting ribbon of blacktop that cuts through the heart of Passaic County, is more than just a road. It's a place of whispers, a stretch where the line between the living and the dead thins until it almost disappears. For decades, it's been a magnet for those seeking a scare. Paranormal investigators, thrill-seeking teenagers, skeptics armed with flashlights and cameras. But long before the road became a viral legend, it was already infamous to those who lived near it. By day, Clinton Road is unremarkable. Trees tower on either side, their branches weaving a canopy that filters the light into strange patterns. There are no houses, no streetlights, and for miles, not a single sign of civilization. But when the sun dips behind the ridges, the forest changes. The silence becomes too complete. No rustling animals, no crickets, no wind. Just a suffocating stillness that seems to watch. People who have driven the road at night say the darkness there isn't natural. It eats headlights, dulls sound, and carries whispers from nowhere. The stories are endless. Locals speak of a spectral pickup truck that chases drivers, of witches and satanic cults who performed rituals in the woods, and of the ghost boy who haunts the small bridge near Dead Man's Curve, who appears if you throw a coin into the water. But none of the tales are as unsettling as the Halloween Lights, a story that begins in 1998 and ends in silence. It was October 31st. 3 college students from Newark, Ryan DeLuca, Amber Shaw, and Eli Vargas, decided to test their courage. They'd heard the legends of Clinton Road all their lives. On Halloween night, under a full moon, they planned to film a short documentary for a college project called Myths of the Northeast. The 3 friends packed a handheld Sony camcorder, a few flashlights, and a couple of beers to calm the nerves as Ryan joked on camera. None of them would ever return. The last known footage of the group begins with laughter. The camcorder captures the interior of their car, Ryan at the wheel, Amber holding the camera, and Eli in the back seat teasing her about being scared. The timestamp reads October 31st, 1998, 11:58 p.m. They drive past the Clinton Ardeer sign, which glows pale under the headlights. For a few minutes, everything is normal. The group talks about local myths, the ghost boy, the so-called cross castle deep in the woods, the phantom truck that appears from nowhere. Amber jokes that if they find the ghost boy, she's taking him home for extra credit. At 12:02 a.m., they reach the small stone bridge that curves over a dark creek. Ryan stops the car, leaves the headlights on, and gets out with Amber. Eli follows, the camera still running. They stand at the bridge, shivering in the cold October air. their breath visible in the beam of their flashlights. Amber tosses a coin into the black water and calls out, "Hey, ghost boy, bring it back." For several seconds, there's only silence, then a splash. The same coin arcs out of the darkness, landing near her feet. Amber laughs nervously. Ryan says, "That's not funny," thinking Eli threw it. But Eli is standing behind them, pale and trembling, whispering, "I didn't move." The camera pans down to the creek. The beam of light catches something white under the surface, a small, pale hand reaching up, fingers twitching. It lingers there, then fades into the ripples. Amber screams and backs away. Ryan laughs shakily, trying to dismiss it, but there's fear in his voice now. They get back into the car and continue driving, faster this time. As they move deeper into the forest, the fog grows thick. The headlights seem to bend against it, barely cutting through. The camera shakes as Amber films through the windshield. Ryan mutters, "It's like we're underwater." At 12:19 a.m., Eli leans forward and says, "Do you guys see that?" The camera turns toward the trees, and there, between the trunks, are lights. Dozens of them. Not headlights or flashlights, but small, bluish orbs floating in the air, glowing faintly and swaying as if suspended by invisible strings. Ryan slows the car, mesmerized. "Probably campers," he says. But Eli shakes his head. "There's no campgrounds here." The camera zooms in. The orbs move in patterns, forming lines, circles, almost deliberate movements, like a slow dance. Then, faintly, the audio picks up something else. Laughter. Children's laughter. But it sounds warped, distant, like it's being played in reverse. The laughter grows louder, overlapping with faint whispers. Amber says, "Ryan, please go," but he doesn't move. The lights are closer now, drifting to the edge of the road. The footage crackles with interference as the fog swells, swallowing the trees. The camera catches a glimpse of something among the lights, shapes, human-shaped, walking slowly between the orbs. They look like children. Their bodies emit that same blue glow, but their faces are wrong, distorted, featureless. One of them holds something that looks like a small lantern, its light flickering inside a bone-white cage. Then the engine cuts out. The recording becomes chaotic. Ryan shouts, banging the dashboard. Amber screams and the camera shakes violently. A loud bang echoes from outside, something hitting the car. The lens catches fleeting glimpses, glowing hands pressing against the windows, faces appearing in the fog, their mouths open in silent cries. Ryan jumps out of the car, yelling for whatever's there to show itself. The camera tilts, and for a brief moment, the headlights reveal movement on both sides of the road. Figures emerging from the forest, their lights blinking on and off like dying candles. At 12:37 a.m., the camera steadies again. Ryan stands in front of the car, flashlight trembling. The beam passes over the road sign, Clinton Ord, and then moves to the back of the car. On the trunk, dozens of small handprints glow faintly in blue dust. They're child-sized, perfect in shape and wet-looking, though the night is bone-dry. Amber whispers, "They're everywhere." Ryan looks around, shining the light into the woods. There are more lights now, hundreds of them, stretching between the trees, flickering like a living constellation. Then from the darkness comes a voice. A child's voice, soft and pleading. "Don't go." The camera shakes violently. There's static, a flash of a pale face inches from the lens, eyes black, mouth open, and then the footage ends. 2 weeks later, a park ranger found the car abandoned on the side of Clinton Road. The doors were open, the keys still in the ignition, and the battery drained. The camcorder was on the passenger seat, its tape rewound to the beginning. There was no sign of Ryan, Amber, or Eli. Search parties combed the area for days but found nothing. No bodies, no footprints, not even tire tracks leaving the scene. The last thing the ranger reported before resigning from the department was strange lights flickering in the woods while he conducted the search. He said they looked like lanterns being carried by invisible hands. The police sealed the tape as evidence. Only a few investigators ever watched it. One retired officer, who later moved out of state, claimed in an interview that it wasn't like any paranormal footage he'd seen before. It wasn't hoaxed, he said. The fear in their voices was real. Whatever they saw that night, it saw them back. Over the years, the legend of the Halloween lights became part of Clinton Road's dark folklore. Teenagers still drive there every October 31st, daring each other to see the lights. Some claim they've seen blue orbs flickering through the fog. Others hear laughter echoing from the creek. A few find coins on their cars in the morning, wet coins, as if they'd been pulled from the black water of the bridge. Locals, though, keep their distance. They say those lights don't belong to any children. They're something older, something that uses the faces of the lost to lure the living. They say the glowing handprints that once covered Ryan's car weren't stains but warnings, left by others who tried to escape before him. To this day, drivers on Clinton Road speak of headlights dimming without reason, of laughter in the static of their radios, of blue light glimmering just beyond the tree line. Those who stop to look never see just one light. They see dozens, spreading through the forest like fireflies in formation. And if you wait too long, you'll notice they're not floating aimlessly. They're coming closer. They say if you stare long enough into the darkness of Clinton Road on Halloween night, the lights will begin to blink in rhythm with your heartbeat. And when they finally stop, that's when you'll hear it. A child's voice whispering softly through the fog. You shouldn't have come here. 2 weeks later, a park ranger found the car parked at the side of the road. Doors open, keys still in the ignition. There was no sign of the 3 students. The tape was recovered from the passenger seat. Despite extensive searches, no bodies were found. The local police filed it as a missing persons case, but those who've seen the tape say it's unlike anything they've ever encountered. The glowing handprints on the car had faded by the time authorities arrived, but the ranger swore he saw them, small, almost perfect, covering the rear window as though pressed there by dozens of children. Over the years, Clinton Road has kept its reputation. Drivers still report strange blue lights flickering in the woods on Halloween night. Some say they hear children laughing from the creek. Others claim to see a figure walking alongside their cars before vanishing into the trees. A few have found coins scattered across their windshields in the morning, damp, as if pulled from cold water. There is a section of Route 49 that cuts through the heart of Mississippi like an old scar, a stretch of 2-lane asphalt that hums beneath the weight of its own secrets. By daylight, it feels almost harmless. The road glints silver under the southern sun, framed by swaying pines, lonely gas stations, and abandoned barns that collapse quietly into the soil. But when darkness falls, the same route transforms into something else entirely. The air thickens, the woods press closer, and the hum of tires becomes the only heartbeat for miles. Truckers call it the hollow stretch. Locals call it cursed ground. And at its center stands what they whisper about in hushed tones, the hollow church. No one agrees on exactly when the church was built. Some claim it rose in the early 1950s. Others insist it's been there far longer. But all the stories trace back to one man, Reverend Elijah Harp, a tall, soft-spoken preacher who appeared in the small town of Dry Creek one spring carrying only a Bible and a voice that could still a crowd. Harp built his church deep in the woods off Route 49, using timber cut from the surrounding cypress. He called it the Church of Eternal Light. For a while, the community adored him. His sermons were powerful, filled with talk of redemption and renewal. Travelers stopped to hear him preach. Entire families moved closer to join his congregation. But something changed that summer. Witnesses later said his messages grew darker, obsessed with cleansing and sacrifice. He claimed God was speaking through the earth itself, that sin had soaked into the soil and only blood could wash it clean. The transformation culminated on Halloween night of 1958. The police report remains vague, the surviving paperwork brittle and half-burned, but one fact stands clear. By dawn, the Church of Eternal Light was nothing but ashes. 13 bodies were found among the ruins, charred beyond recognition, their skeletons discovered still kneeling in prayer. Reverend Harp's body was never recovered. Locals swore they saw him wandering the woods for weeks after, barefoot and muttering scripture to the trees. Then he was gone. The county fenced the land and tried to forget. Decades passed. Trees grew over the blackened foundations, erasing every sign that a church had ever stood there. Yet the stories didn't die. Truckers traveling through the Delta began to report strange things. Faint candlelight flickering in the distance, voices drifting through the fog, hymns sung too slowly to recognize. Radios would burst into static exactly at mile 223, followed by what one driver described as a man reading scripture backwards. State troopers investigated twice in the 1970s and found nothing but overgrown forest. Still, the calls kept coming. One of the most infamous accounts came from Thomas Hale, a long-haul driver with 15 years on the road. His story aired during a 1998 Halloween broadcast on a Mississippi radio station. The host introduced him simply as Tom, and the sound of his voice, shaking, cracked, too tired to lie, still haunts anyone who's heard the recording. It was about midnight, Thomas began. October 30th, maybe a few minutes before Halloween. I was hauling steel beams out of Jackson. The fog rolled in thicker than I'd ever seen. I slowed to 30. Then I saw it, a light in the woods. Not headlights. It flickered, like candles behind stained glass. He pulled over onto the shoulder. The fog was so heavy it muffled sound. The world felt padded and unreal. Yet through that silence, he heard faint singing, soft, drawn out, words he couldn't quite place. Against his better judgment, Thomas grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the trees. The ground sucked at his boots, damp and cold. The smell of wet soil mixed with something else, a sweetness, faintly rotten like flowers left too long on a grave. I followed the light, he said, and there it was. The church, half burned down but standing, candles all along the aisle, shadows moving between them. He described seeing dozens of figures swaying in rhythm, faces hidden by veils of smoke. They sang an old hymn, their voices hollow and uneven. At the altar stood a tall man in a black coat. Thomas swore his collar was white, the skin beneath charred as if from fire. When the preacher lifted his head, his eyes glowed like dying coals. He smiled at me, Thomas said, and that's when I heard my name. Clear as day, from every voice in that room. Panic hit him like electricity. He stumbled backward, tripping over roots, sprinting toward the faint glimmer of his truck's taillights. Behind him the singing rose, louder, faster, turning into a roar of voices chanting his name. When he finally reached the cab, the engine refused to start. He turned the key again and again. Nothing. Then the radio flickered to life. Static first, then a low male voice. "Where are you going, brother?" "The sermon's not over." Thomas froze. Every light in the cab blinked out. The air grew hot, choking, and the smell of burning wax filled his lungs. He said he blacked out. When he woke, the sun was rising. The truck was silent. His windshield, however, was smeared with black handprints, long and ashy, as though someone had pressed against the glass from the outside. Across the passenger window, scrawled in soot, were 4 words: "See you next Sabbath." Police later inspected the truck but found no evidence of tampering. The prints couldn't be identified. The residue wasn't ash nor dirt. It tested as a mix of melted wax and something organic. Thomas refused to drive that route again. 2 months later, he quit trucking entirely and moved north. He died in 2006, but his daughter told reporters that every year on Halloween, the same 4 words appeared on his bedroom window, written in fog from the inside. Route 49 has gathered countless similar tales. In 2009, a patrol officer found an empty sedan idling on the shoulder near the old Briar Hollow turnoff. Doors open, radio hissing with static. The driver, a 23-year-old student returning from a costume party, was never found. Her phone was recovered in the seat, recording a 3-minute audio clip. The file begins with her humming along to the radio. Then the music cuts out, replaced by faint organ music. A male voice whispers, "Step inside, sister." The recording ends with a distant crackle of fire. Historians digging into Reverend Harp's background found little that explains the horror. He wasn't ordained by any church. No birth certificate exists. But one county record from 1933 lists an Elijah Harp as a patient at the Meridian State Asylum, admitted for religious mania and released 10 years later. In the same file, a doctor's note reads, Subject speaks of hollow earth beneath Mississippi where angels burn and rise again. Those who live near Dry Creek still treat the site with unease. Hunters refuse to enter the woods. Some say animals go missing. Others swear they've seen light glowing under the forest floor, as if embers still burn beneath decades of roots. Every Halloween, the sheriff's department receives at least one call about music in the trees. When deputies respond, they find only silence and the faint scent of candle wax lingering on the wind. One retired officer who requested anonymity described what he witnessed during an unofficial visit to the area in 2014. He'd parked his cruiser near mile marker 223 just after midnight, determined to debunk the stories. At first, he told a journalist, it was just fog. Then my headlights hit something reflective, like stained glass catching light. But there ain't no buildings out there. He got out, walked 20 feet into the woods, and the radio on his shoulder crackled with a voice that wasn't dispatch. It recited scripture, and the hollow shall open and swallow the unclean. He quit the force 3 weeks later. Travelers who dare to test the legend claim the church appears only to those driving alone, just before midnight, and only if they've been on the road long enough to start drifting between exhaustion and dream. It begins with a glow in the fog, then the singing. If you ignore it and keep driving, it fades. But if you stop, even for a moment, you might see the steeple rising out of the mist, candles flickering through broken windows, and a tall figure at the door raising one hand in greeting. Those who step closer never return the same. A paranormal investigator once tried to locate the ruins using infrared drones. They recorded nothing but trees, except for a single frame showing a rectangular outline glowing faintly under the soil, precisely where county maps marked the old church foundation. The next night, the drone operator died in a car crash, his vehicle found burning on the side of Route 49. The fire marshal noted that the flames burned unusually cool, leaving the interior coated in melted candle wax. Locals say the hollow church isn't just haunted, it's alive. That every year it rebuilds itself for one night only, brick by brick, timber by timber, reforming from the ashes to host its final congregation. The 13 who died in 1958 sing their endless hymn while their preacher calls new souls to join. Some even believe the road itself feeds the haunting, that every accident, every life lost on Route 49 strengthens the spirit of Reverend Harp's eternal service. Whether the legend is truth or superstition, one warning has persisted through generations of Mississippi travelers: never follow the lights in the woods. If you hear hymns when the air is still, turn up your radio and drive faster. And if a voice comes through the static asking, "Brother, where are you going?" don't answer. Because on Route 49, the hollow church is still waiting. The candles are still burning. And somewhere deep beneath the roots and soil, Reverend Elijah Harp is still preaching to a congregation that never left.